Let's get into it. Hey everybody, thank you so much for coming and joining us for yet another great interview in our 2023 Business Virtual Summit. Today we are going to be talking to Joe. Now he is an expert in expanding your company outside of your country, and he's been doing it for other companies and helping them along. So today we're going to be diving into that topic. Joe, why don't you give us a little introduction to yourself, what's your background, and a brief introduction into what we're going to be talking about.
Hey Bill, thanks for having me. I'm Joe Menniger. I live and work in Germany, close to Frankfurt, and I have been a professional consultant for something above like 15 years and a professional podcaster for more than 10 years. In the past, have been working with well-known international consultancies. I've been working internationally, doing market entries from one perspective, like going into Germany, and from the perspective German companies going, for example, into the US and so on and so forth. And since end of 2020, early 2021, I'm a freelance consultant, startup scout, and I also run my startup podcast in English.
Awesome. That is fantastic. So I think the first thing that I want to kind of go through, and I want to kind of segment this into a couple different pieces, and I like putting it together in a way that kind of gives it a step-by-step process for people. So let's start with a company is thinking of going outside their country. What are the first things that they need to contemplate in order to do this successfully?
At first, I would look at the potential market. It does make sense to set up your company somewhere where your product is either illegal or doesn't have a market. That will be the first question I would be asking. I talk to a lot of potential international clients, and I always talk about Germany because it's the biggest market within the European Union. I think we make up something like 23-24% of the combined GDP of the European Union.
That's impressive. All right, so definitely understanding your product and where you need to go is definitely a huge piece. And now I know that we were also talking about some of the other hurdles and things that we need to think about because the business culture is different in each place that you might be looking to go. So can you talk a little bit about, what can we expect from looking at business cultures and the way that these places might be putting themselves together? How do we get our head around those different perspectives of how things run?
I personally would start with some kind of training in business culture for the prospective country in your own home country. For example, when I was going to China, I had no training whatsoever in any way. And it kind of hurt me in the beginning, but I did learn it, admittedly, the hard way. It's the same here in Germany. Um, I would say everything takes a little bit longer. The administrative costs are a little bit higher, but then it actually works like clockwork when you set up a company here. I would also look at the environment. Where are companies? Where are other potential customers? How physically close do you need to be to your customers? That would be all things I would be looking at. What I've seen many companies do, they have somebody who is willing to go abroad and they actually send him to this or that co-working space in the country they want to go and then evaluate the different cities. I can always pick Germany as an example. Many would associate startups with Berlin. But if you're a deep tech startup, it totally makes sense to also look at Munich. If you're into aviation, Hamburg is the third largest aviation hub in the world, just behind Seattle, of course, Boeing, and Lyon, where there's Airbus. And the other factories, the big factories of Airbus, are in Hamburg. Insurance business in Cologne and Düsseldorf, banking, Frankfurt, automotive, Stuttgart. So there are many different places you will need to look at, not just doing, oh, yeah, that's a big city, let's go there. Think in terms of your client, think in terms of your market. That is very important. And of course, get some very good legal help and of course, a very good tax advisor. They together can help you a lot. Um, it's the same like in the US. In Germany, in my podcast, I always say don't mess with Finanzamt. It's a German IRS. You don't want to get into trouble with them.
Absolutely. And that is definitely a huge part to be looking at and like you said, finding the different professionals who know those areas you're trying to get into. Expanding outside of what you're used to, it's always a great thing to get someone who is familiar with that area, like yourself. You're very familiar with Germany, so if a country's thinking of going into Germany, you're the guy to talk to because now they have someone who's intimately aware of all the different pieces. Where can my product go, just like you were saying. So I think one of the other key things to point out is that the perception of the world has shrank. Whereas before, doing something like, oh, I was doing business in Japan or in Germany, that meant like, oh, you're traveling, you're going outside your bounds, it's so much broader. Now we're having a Zoom call. The world is getting a lot smaller when it comes to getting business done from a global scale. And I think that what I want to kind of talk a little bit about now is, those communication differences, how is that making it easier or more difficult to expand? Like, how does communication come into play?
I would actually say I'm in my early 40s, and at this age, if you have studied abroad, this kind of levels out. So you'll talk to a lot of people who've also been studying either in Europe or in the US or in Canada. They'll have at least the same approach, the same mindset that you have been taught during the course of time. If you go into a little bit older, a more senior executives, that may not be the same case. Or if you talk to people who have not been living dash working dash studying abroad, that makes a big difference, my personal experience. So that always helps if you have somebody who not only knows the culture of your destination, but also of your origin, and help to kind of fuse them together, because everybody's complaining Germany has so many public holidays here. Actually, it's not so much more. We just have more days of vacation here.
Absolutely. And that's definitely another piece to understand as well when you're going into a different market, not only just from being able to expand there when it comes to growing your business, but part of what you need to know to expand is the demographic, the different isographics, the things that those people who are going to be looking at your product are going to see. Because certain cultures are going to, want to do more when it comes to a certain product or service than say others, and it might be more interested in it. So definitely another piece to always contemplate. So now that we kind of have a perspective of things we definitely need to think about when it comes to expanding, what are some pieces that would be actions that we need to take? Let's say we have our team and our perception. We know Germany is going to be a great place to go. What are some of the steps that we're going to have to face down in making an expansion into, let's use Germany as the example.
For example, if you want to go into Germany, you would, of course, need to work out all the legal ways to send people over here, set up a legal entity here. If you have another one in the European Union, that would be something to hammer out with a lawyer, if that works. Hire people here or through another company. There are not right now enough companies in the world through which you can hire basically a person in almost every country in the world. So you don't need to go here and spend thousands of euros just in legal fees. There are right now a lot of cheaper ways to do that. That holds true for a lot of different industries. I do believe what you've been referring to, that the world has shrunk, is totally the case in everything that has to do with communications, with professional services, with knowledge work. But I do believe for a lot of physical products, the ships didn't get faster, the production didn't get faster. Um, it it doesn't hold true for every industry, but at least for the management of those physical products, it also holds true.
Absolutely. Sorry. No, I like that, and I do think that that's another piece to kind of talk about. The infrastructure kind of piece of it, where we're getting ourselves set. That's one of the definite actions to do. So when it comes to the infrastructure for things, you know, when it comes to expanding it, if I'm a company that has a product or something physical that needs to be created and put somewhere,
Mhm.
um, what are some of the differences you're seeing with a company that might have maybe a service or something that's not a physical tangible item, and then the ones that are, what are some of the differences that those companies need to do in order to, make that expansion work? Are there different legal sides, business sides? Like what are some of the hurdles they might run into?
Where to start? Personal, very personal experience. If you are a software startup of any kind that doesn't need to be on premise installed in servers, like physically in the building of the client, you are almost free to provide your services all over the world. I personally use a hosting service for my podcast that is located in the UK. I use some advertising services provided from the US. I do have a personal virtual assistant who helps me with editing and publishing my podcast, who's physically based in Sri Lanka.
Hmm.
And I'm basically a very small company. So if you're working with such a non-physical, let's call it non-physical setup, there should be opportunities to do business all over the world with co-working, HR services, and so on and so forth, that you don't necessarily need a legal entity somewhere. Completely different ball game if you talk about liability, physical products, guarantees, warranties, customer service. That changes the game.
Absolutely. And I think that that changes the way that people are going to do things. So, all right, so those are some of the things that we definitely need to tackle in order to, when it comes to actions. And obviously, there's a boatload more of things to do, but this gives us a perspective of what we're talking about here. I think that what I want to do to kind of pull it all together is talk about some of the benefits of expanding outside of your local area that you work. And I think that it ties in a lot of the different things that we're talking about. So talk about some of the experiences and results that the people you work with are getting.
Usually we're talking about a lot of growth. Talking about top line growth. When you start selling your product somewhere, you do have additional expenses and so on and so forth. But over time, that also hits down to the bottom line where you also see your profit growing. You first need to get in, you need to learn, allocate more time if you expand, especially from the US abroad. It always takes longer abroad. Don't be too aggressive with your business case there. If in doubt, give it double the time or 3 times. No problem at all. And the results my clients have been seeing is a growth depending on their size, on average of 20% of their top line revenue growth. That is something they've been looking at. But over time, you just cannot send one person to Germany and expect your very large company to grow by that much within a short span of time. You need to be there. You need to set up a network. You need to sell. You need a local sales team, a legal entity. Of course, you need a lot of people because we do have so many days of vacation and so on and so forth. But over time, if you don't approach it too aggressive, it should work out. And never forget, get a good lawyer, get a good tax advisor.
Absolutely. And those are some amazing things that I think, are direct results of all the things that we've been talking about, especially with the additional, profit and all that, and all of those pieces. So, I'm going to edit this part
Oh,
out, I don't think.
and talking about the profit, um, always also talk to a tax advisor in your own country, because every big company out in the world, they do have a lot of headache with the different um, IRS services, Finanzamt, the different legal entities in the respective countries just internal transfer pricing. If you talk to a tax advisor about that, they'll have dollar signs in their eyes because it's a never-ending story. And for big companies, this is really a big issue, next to liability, next to quality, next to HR topics. Big topic as well.
Absolutely. All right, great. So give me a second. I'm trying to think if there's any other questions I want to ask before I wrap up. I think I'm good. Did you have anything else you wanted to touch on before, like that I can prompt you for before we wrap up that I didn't cover?
You could ask what people can learn more. They can find me on LinkedIn and listen to my podcast.
Yeah, that'll be the closing. I just didn't know if
Mhm.
there was any other topic points you think that would be good to kind of briefly mention or anything.
We just barely scratched the surface.
Oh, yeah, I know that, but I mean, like, I didn't know if there was anything else. All right, cool. So, all right, ready?
Ready.
Awesome. I think that that definitely covers briefly a lot of different things that need to be thought about when it comes to expanding outside of our local area. And, you know, to kind of pull it all together, please tell us a little bit about how we can reach you, how we can get in contact with you so that you could potentially help people do this expansion.
Mhm. As I said, my name is Jörn Menninger, Joern, Manager. You can find me on LinkedIn, you can Google me, and you can subscribe to my audio and video podcast, video on YouTube, startuprate.io. And there's always a contact information in there through which you can find me. You can reach out also on my link tree there. No problem at all. You can even find me and follow me on Twitter.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Joe. I really appreciate your time. And everyone, thank you so much for watching another great interview for our 2023 Business Summit. Remember, we have our networking all this week, and you can grow your connections and your network. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.